Hey, welcome back to my pandemic garden. I'm Spencer, and in this episode, I'm transplanting trees. With all this tree transplanting, don't get me wrong. In previous years, Melissa and I have completely and totally bought more than our fair share of trees. And I'm talking both bare rootstock, like the little buggers with just roots hanging off the bottom, and more mature trees with good sized root balls, the ones that cost you like way too much for a tree. And we have planted all those store-bought trees in the traditional way. But as this COVID-19 business has us sheltering in place and my shortage of work has me being chintzier even than normal, there's no reason not to plant trees. It's just a question of pulling them out of one place on our spread and moving them over to another. The deal here is that we've got a bare spot on one back fence line that's just calling out for trees. And then the fortunate thing that kind of goes along with that is that the previous owners of our place were actually tree fiends, like total tree nuts. And I could tell you stories about that, but all you need to know is that they planted trees seemingly willy-nilly all over the freaking place around here, and there are still some little small ones that are transplantable. By the way, my sense is that digging up trees and digging in general pretty much riles up most dogs. When you start digging, they kind of look at you and they must be thinking that you're sort of one of them, digging a hole just like they would be digging a hole. And on this digging escapade, I even discovered that Tink, while playing fetch around a newly dug hole, will drop her dang tennis ball down in the hole like every single time. But back to the trees. So I started out digging up a few trees that the previous folks had planted. And these were aspens. At least I'm 99% sure that they were aspens. And they didn't have that big of a root system, so they were easy to dig out. But they're nice little trees, and in our mind, kind of in the way where they'd been planted, so we were looking to move them. Plus, they're going to look a whole lot better back along that back fence line. When digging out a tree, you got to go for a good size root ball. That's like the rule you got to follow. So you're basically digging out a big old ball of soil around the base of the tree that's going to go with the tree when you move it. You don't want to just rip the tree out and have the roots all exposed, although I got to say that I've done that a few times and it's worked out. But just forget about that. Go for a root ball. That's just the way to do it. You might, while you're digging that root ball, chop a few roots. The roots spread out all over the place, but that's all right. You cut a few roots, move the root ball and the tree, and it might be a little bit shocked when you first move it, but once it's watered in, it should be okay. And from what I've heard, some people debate the right shovel to use for tree moving day. And, that's just like people that talk about that kind of thing. I wouldn't really worry too much about it. Whatever shovel you're used to using is going to work. You just need a shovel for digging holes. That's about as particular as this gets. All right, so back at the soon-to-be new tree line, there were some choices to make. You got to think to yourself, are you making like a line of trees all equidistantly spaced and symmetrical and all that? Or are you going for more of like an organic arrangement of the new trees, like a natural looking forest? And then how close are all these trees going to be together? And you can actually look up the specs for each species of tree online or in a tree book or whatever, and you'll find out that the canopy of some trees is 20 feet while others is 15, so you can go by that. But having seen plenty of nice little stands of aspens in my time, I decided to just put these little aspens in a gathering, so they can kind of like keep themselves company and not too far from each other. I also found plenty more trees to transplant under some of our evergreens. These guys are honeysuckle, and though my buddy Hector would warn me against planting too much honeysuckle because it can go kind of crazy and take over the place, and he can tell you a story about that, that's actually kind of exactly what I'm going for on this back tree line that I've been talking about, so I dug out the honeysuckle. Plus, the deal with honeysuckle here is that it does really, really well, and I'm hoping that it'll take root. I put this evergreen a little bit more out in the open though, kind of near the aspens, and I think it's a white cedar. At least that's what I've heard people call these things around town. They kind of pop up voluntarily. People refer to them as white cedars. But just now I looked on the interwebs and I didn't see any white cedar that looked like these trees. So I don't know exactly what it is. Anyway, it's a tree. It's a good looking tree, pretty good size, and I planted it like the others in a hole about twice as wide as the root ball. That way the soil is kind of disturbed around the tree, and I guess the thinking is that the roots have half a chance to grow out into that soft soil. All right, next up was some grafting. And I gotta tell you guys, I'm a complete grafting noob all the way. And these grafts will likely not work out. I'm just gonna say that. I don't wanna jinx them or anything, but I just don't think they're gonna work out because number one, it's kind of late in the season to be doing grafting. I think you're supposed to do it when the trees are more dormant. And also, I'm a grafting noob. This is like my first or second or only 10th time grafting trees. Anyway, the other thing is that I grafted these apple scions, I think they're called. The scion's like the top part of a grafted tree. I grafted these things to some funky rootstock. Like I made some weird choices here. The first one went on a totally rando tree, like genus Rando Varieteus or something like that. And the other one went on a black locust. And I don't know if you've ever seen an apple tree grafted to a black locust. I know I haven't, but if it does work out, it's going to be one badass tree because you know those black locusts have like thorns all over them. So the base of that apple tree will just be nothing but thorny spikes, and the top will be luscious, great apples. Anyway, the backstory with the grafting pliers, because they kind of look technical or whatever. The backstory is that someone sent me these grafting pliers a while back to test out. And now we've got this darn pandemic on our hands. And you know what I'm doing? I'm just testing out just about everything imaginable, as long as it doesn't involve going to the store. If these grafts actually take, I'm going to let you know in a future episode. Scout's honor. If they don't, let's just agree to forget about it. And then I guess since we're talking about trees, I should probably show you this. This is our orchard, and it's kind of small and old. Seriously old trees. We have lost a couple in the last few years. This one and this one. This guy is an apple tree. And then the ones in the middle here are apples, and we got pears on the end. So what we did is we just kind of came in and tried to reinforce this with some new stock. And Melissa and I planted apple over here, and those are a couple peach trees down there. So we did apple here and apple all the way along this run, just to kind of fill out this orchard a little bit. And these guys just have the traditional kind of water ring on the bottom, so you know, kind of like a flat spot around the root ball, and then a ring just to kind of capture the water. And once it warms up a little bit more, I'll be watering these guys a couple times a week, at least for this first year. So you can see the apples kind of run up this way. So yeah, definitely an old orchard, some older trees, but man, it's been so productive. We did a little bit of pruning this year to eliminate some of the vertical stuff, but we didn't want to overdo it. It hadn't been pruned in a long time. So if you're looking at this and thinking, man, those trees need to be pruned, we're definitely taking it kind of slow year by year. We don't want to wipe out everything that was up high, but old trees, definitely some issues, a little bit of funk going on, and you know, like this one, definitely funkified. Got some rot and everything, but you know, it's still going, it's thriving and putting out a lot of apples. So we're gonna keep these guys alive as long as we can. Now I'm just remembering a couple days ago there was a tree down back here and we had a big windstorm, but yeah, it looks like it's still hanging. It's just kind of like a snag here. Yeah, so you can see it here. The trick is going to be taking this guy out without it totally wrecking my fence. And no story of trees is complete, I guess, without mentioning the full tragic life cycle of a tree. So, you know, you start out with a ton of hope and promise and optimism that the tree will someday bring you shade or privacy or fruit, or maybe even all three. And then you enjoy that tree for years. I mean, like a long time. You maybe even start taking that tree for granted. But then, darn it, if the next thing you know, you're not having to take that tree out. Maybe it's too close to the house or it's wind damaged or something, but that tree ends up coming down. This one was a black locust, which is one tough tree if you've ever cut one down. When they're healthy, the wood on these things is pretty much like iron or concrete, just really, really solid, and they make great, great fence posts. But this one was rotted all to heck, and the woodpeckers had loved on it for a while, and then it fell over on its own, and the wood was kind of squishy and soft. So it'll be nice in a bonfire one evening this summer, and then nothing but ash. Alright, now my guess is that it's going to fall and crush the fence. It's just like my theory. I can get my truck out and kind of push it over, or my ladder or whatever, but I'm just going to chance it. The fence is totally flimsy anyway, so if it gets crushed, I can just squish it back in place. That was good. The fence is just fine, and I just have to chop the tree up. All right, that's it for another episode about my pandemic garden. This one obviously was less about the garden and more about trees. It might seem at a time like this a little bit crazy to be transplanting trees or grafting them or taking one out. You know, it seems like the future is just all about this freaking virus. Predictions of like number of people sick and number of people dead and what's going on in this country and county and city and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of hope and just kind of future thinking in a larger sense around gardening and planting trees and just like taking care of the land. That sounds a little bit hokey, a little bit like Emerson meets Bob Ross or something like that. But I do think that at this time, if you have the chance to grow some food, raise some birds, you know, do whatever you can to help yourself and others, it may take just a little bit of the pressure off these big, complicated global networks and systems which are vulnerable at a time like this. And dang it, it's just like good for you, good for the soul. All right, thanks for checking it out. And keep in mind, there are more than one ways to plant a tree.